Welcome back, and we're going to get started here. So we talked about my inappropriate sexual behaviors a little bit, and now we're going to talk about disrespecting females and female BCBAs in the field of behavior analysis. So I started meeting a lot of cool BCBAs in the field on Facebook after I did an interview with Ryan O'Donnell from the Daily BA. I wanted to get to know them. I sought clinical advice on Facebook from many BCBAs. So basically I was like, I didn't have ABA therapy, and I didn't have the access to a BCBA. And so I would try to get help on Facebook by just asking BCBAs questions about social behavior on Facebook and trying to get clinical advice from them on Facebook, which was inappropriate because there was no contract between us, and we couldn't get I couldn't get clinical advice from them because of ethics concerns with the BACB. That was really a hard time for me because I was putting them in an uncomfortable situation. And at the time, I was also very suicidal and very depressed, and I was making threats to kill myself and things like that. And I totally put them in a rough spot, and I wanted to apologize for that because it was unfair to them and their profession and things like that. So I also made BCBAs angry with me by doing that, and also by hitting on some of the female BCBAs, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And I developed a bad reputation in the field because I was inappropriate sexually and clinically with them. And so I just really need to clean up that reputation. And now that I'm in a healthier place, I'm able to forge those friendships without putting them in a position to give clinical advice or, and making them uncomfortable. And also I can avoid some of that sexual behavior because I've learned some more appropriate social skills, and my emotional regulation isn't such that I'm all or nothing thinking where I'm falling in love with someone right away, which triggers my sexual behavior towards them. So I'm doing a lot better, and cleaning up this reputation, and trying to, I want to have good friendships and healthy friendships, and doing so requires being mature and taking ownership of my behavior and moving on. I would like to apologize to the females in the field of behavior analysis for being sexually inappropriate with them. I would like to take ownership of the behavior. Like I said, I was misguided and very misunderstood. So we talked about a lot that I learned from Peter Gerhardt, but I didn't have anybody at his level to dive in and help me navigate those situations and understand some of the behaviors that he was talking about. So I was really misguided, and I took things that Peter said out of context and used them and misapplied them to my life. I'm interested in disseminating the science of ABA to help other men with autism. So I really want to help guys with autism avoid falling into the traps that I fell into with sexual behavior. That's really important to me. And disseminating the science to help keep women safe as well. So when you teach men with autism sexuality education, not only are you helping them and keeping them from being labeled as creepy or unsafe or being labeled as a predator, but you're actually helping females, keeping them safe from those situations in which men with autism might accidentally end up in stalking situations or harassment situations with them. So that's very important. Stalking in the law. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I often wish that it was more illegal to stalk someone than what it is, because if there was written rules regarding stalking, I think it'd be easier for men with Asperger's syndrome and autism to avoid falling into that trap of stalking them. So, but it's kind of a gray area, right? So, not all stalking is legal. Some forms of stalking are illegal, and some aren't, and it might be different with each person. So what one girl considers stalking might not be considered stalking by another girl. So we really need to help people with autism learn how to generalize and apply these different elements of what stalking is, because we have to teach them how to avoid that and how to respect women, and also just we can teach this overall concept of what stalking is and teach them to avoid it, but it's a wide spectrum, right? So what one considers stalking, another one might not consider stalking. Talk a little bit about stalking. Creepy is gray. Stalking is gray. Some stalking is illegal, some is not. This is person-centered, so it's individualized by each girl on the receiving end of the stalking. Or in some cases men, because men do get stalked by women as well. That's very important to remember. I send a dozen roses to people's workplaces quite a bit. In the past I have done that. I'm trying not to do that anymore in the future. But what that means is if I go to like, say I go to my doctor and there's a female receptionist at the doctor's office, I might think that she's cute. And I don't even talk to her, but I just say hi to her. How are you? Like small talk, like you would with an associate. So I have this small talk conversation with her and say, hi, how are you? And I think she's cute. And so when I leave the doctor's office, I will actually go to the flower shop and have a dozen roses delivered to her office where she's working and say, hi, I'm Travis. I really like you and think you're pretty. And that can be considered stalking because you haven't built the connection with her in order to be able to send her a dozen roses. So that's really important. We teach these steps, guys. We have to have the emotional steps to form the emotional connection with someone, but also then you have to have the social skills to go with that emotional connection. And if you don't, then it's going to be you're going to be misguided. You're going to be stalking her because you're going to be sending her flowers out of context. And that's very important to avoid that behavior. So coming on too strong is sending a dozen roses, definitely coming on too strong, doing that too soon. We don't want to do that. And we don't want to skip those steps from step 1 to step 787 because if we skip those steps, we're going to be doing our behavior is going to be out of context with where we are emotionally connected to them. So skipping steps, social steps, and emotional connection are interchangeable. If you're emotionally connected at step 1 socially, you can't go to step 787 socially because you're not emotionally connected to her on that level. Depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety are the most common comorbid diagnoses associated with autism spectrum disorder. My inappropriate sexual behavior and inability to connect with women led to the development of mental health challenges. These mental health challenges only exaggerated my sexual behaviors. People thought I was hypersexual because I skipped to the last step. But I was just anxious and confused. So what happened was, because I would always go from step 1 to step 787, let's talk about context here. So because I was wanting to get to step 787, I was asking everyone for help with step 787. This basically meant that I was asking the state of Indiana to help me touch a breast. So I would send emails asking them to help me get to step 787 and help me touch breasts. So what I was asking for in reality was that I really wanted to get a girlfriend, but I was confused on what the last step was. So I should have been asking them for help with like developing healthy relationships, but instead I was asking them for help with touching breast. And obviously I didn't get a good response to that, and people thought I was crazy, and that caused people to mislabel me a little bit as being hypersexual, and that led to different treatments and different interventions and different medications that probably should have been avoided because I might not have necessarily been hypersexual. I was just anxious and confused, like I said. Acquaintance or girlfriend. So black and white thinking causes me to label someone as an acquaintance or a girlfriend from the moment I meet them. All or nothing thinking places potential friends in acquaintance or girlfriend category from step 1. So from when I say hi to someone, I'm labeling them as an acquaintance or a girlfriend. Meeting guys is hard because I don't desire them to be my boyfriend. Obviously I'm straight and I like girls, so I want a girlfriend, not a boyfriend. But yeah, at the same time, I don't understand how to be just friends with someone because I'm thinking I'm generalizing down to either acquaintance or generalizing up to girlfriend. So that's very important to remember. So what is a friend? A friend for me is the gray concept. It's a gray area because it's not an all or nothing thing. So it's not acquaintance or it's not girlfriend. So friendship is very hard for me to understand. And I try to understand that and navigate that situation. Sometimes I get confused with the boundaries of what a friendship is because I'm constantly trying to make someone my girlfriend because I'm over-categorizing it. So I need to learn the gray area and understand what just friends is. And that's something that I'm working on daily. All or nothing thinking makes people think that I'm hypersexual because they see me going from hi, I'm Travis to can I touch you? And we talked about that a little bit in the last slide. So let's talk about this whole idea, the title of this presentation, the title of my book, Can I Touch You? So we have to talk about the context here. Can I Touch You is the name of my new book. I chose this name to raise awareness to the issue of consent and how men with Asperger's or autism might understand consent. I always thought I was asking a woman for permission to touch them and being polite and respectful. Two things I understood with sexuality was body part ID, and you should ask for permission to touch a woman before touching her. Why did I know this? I knew these two things because you all know them. You know them, and so you know how to teach that. The problem is that asking for permission to touch is the last step in a 787-step chain that goes from, "Hi, I'm Travis," all the way to, "Can I touch your breast?" You can't skip steps. Asking a woman for permission to ask her for a sexual question about consent is important. Consent. I used to think that asking for permission to touch was respectful. Most people don't like to talk about sex. You need to nonchalantly ask a woman for permission to see if it's okay to touch her, to even ask her for consent to touch her. So what I mean by that is that I've learned that just coming right out and asking for consent is kind of like a boundary issue. Like, you don't overstep that boundary. Like, you never verbally ask for consent until you've actually nonchalantly gotten her permission to touch her or ask her for consent. So like, basically you want to kind of like explain it like this. You kind of want to have a good idea that she's going to say yes before you even ask her for consent, so that you don't make her uncomfortable by asking her. So it's kind of like a nonverbal game. And ASPs struggle with this nonverbal communication and trying to understand this. And it's tough to understand the gray areas. So it's a very gray concept because you don't know how to read her. You have to read her situation. You have to read her and read her mind. And, you know, like, it's a gray area because, like, it's going to take a different number of steps to get a girl comfortable to let her with consent, to where she's consenting to let you touch her for each woman. So one woman might take 787 steps, one woman might take 500 steps, and one woman might take 1,200 steps. You just don't know. And this is where it becomes very important, is that you've got to be able to understand how to read her and read her nonverbal communication and pick up on those cues to be able to understand when she's ready for that touch. So consent continued. Why don't we talk about consent? Traditional sex ed teaches about birth control, babies, condoms, and STDs, but it doesn't teach about consent. Sexual behavior is social behavior. We talk about the result of our behavior, but not the behavior that leads to the result. So we talk about having babies, but we don't talk about, well, this is how you get someone to have sex with you. This is how you can talk about consent. This is all these above things. We don't talk about the how-to. We talk about the result, but we don't talk about the how-to, and that's extremely frustrating for me. So sexual behavior is social behavior, like we said. Sexual thinking is social thinking. I talked about that a little bit earlier. So let's talk about sexual thinking, guys. Michelle Garcia-Winner is the mother of social thinking in that theory. It's how we process, interpret, and respond to social interactions and behaviors, in my opinion. It's analyzing what is going on, nonverbal communication and cues, and sexual thinking is flirting. So basically, to me, if I had to sum up what sexual thinking was to me, sexual thinking would be flirting and how to flirt with someone. And it's how to flirt in appropriate and correct social context. Flirting. Flirting is not always sexual. I used to think that flirting was making sexual comments. Flirting is not sexual behavior. You can't flirt. You can flirt by simply getting to know you with simple getting to know you questions. So basically, you can flirt by asking questions and getting to know someone. Showing interest is flirting. Don't have to send flowers to flirt, and it's best to be non-sexual in flirting. So what I mean by this is that with being black and white and having to categorize things, when I labeled someone my girlfriend, I thought you automatically had to have sexual behavior towards them to flirt with them. Flirting is a gray area, just like a lot of these other topics we're talking about today. But I thought it was black and white. So basically, my brain would tell me from over-categorizing and generalizing down to acquaintance and up to girlfriend, is that if you generalize down and you're an acquaintance, you don't be sexual. You're not going to try and flirt. You're not going to be sexual. But if you're generalizing up and you're trying to make someone your girlfriend, then you generalize up, and you have to flirt and you have to be sexual. So like basically when I put someone into these one or two categories, I'm either going to not flirt with you or not be sexual with you, or I'm going to flirt with you and be sexual with you. There was no in-between ground for me, and that was really hard for me to navigate social relationships because, again, there's a lot of grayness to social relationships, and the gray area is extremely important, and I was missing out on that area. So let's think, we got to start teaching our brains to be flexible to the gray thinking concepts. That's very important. Nonverbal flirting. Flirting involves nonverbal communication. Reading nonverbal cues is important. Responding to nonverbal communication, like this is how you like interact with people and respond to their behaviors and communicate with them. So you have to be able to communicate nonverbally. Observing flirting. So how do we observe flirting as behavior analysts, and how do we operationally define flirting? That's very important. I think it can be done, but I think we have to be able to be comfortable talking about it. Teaching flirting. So how the heck do we teach someone how to flirt? Again, it can be done. We just have to be comfortable with it, and we have to write billable goals. So how do you write a billable goal for flirting and relationships and dating and things like that? Reading between the lines. So like when you're flirting, there's a lot of sexual innuendos going on, and you have to be able to read between the lines. So this is something that I struggle with, and many people with autism struggle with, is it's just very hard for me to read the innuendos of what's going on. And I'll never forget when I worked at Wendy's, a fast food restaurant, there was a lot of people talking on the headset, like because you can talk on the headsets, you can talk between each other inside, and you can talk outside through the drive-thru. So when people would joke around and talk inside to each other, there'd be a lot of sexual innuendos going on, and I didn't understand those, so I didn't get to participate in that. I didn't understand what to say, but how I was supposed to respond to people that were making sexual jokes and sexual innuendos. So we need to teach some of that stuff, and it's important that we know job coaches, traditional job coaches, and traditional DSPs aren't going to be qualified to teach them that stuff. So we need the BCBA to come in and really work on some of those issues. And so flirting and medical necessity, how do we actually dive into this medical necessity issue and teach flirting in ABA? So how do we get a billable goal where we can actually bill to teach flirting? And we show that by demonstrating that flirting has social value, increases social skills, increases social and emotional connection, and increases the ability to be independent when you're able to flirt. Why ABA for sexual behavior? Sexual behavior is simply social behavior. So like that means that behavior analysts work with social behavior. And so we're probably the most qualified to be able to deal with it because we study social behavior. So that means we automatically study sexual behavior. So we observe it, we measure it, we shape it. Behavior analysts do all of those things. We are the primary field to address sexual behavior, in my opinion. Step 1 is step 787. I was black and white. I was a black and white thinker before meeting Peter Gerhardt. Then he told the story about step 1 and step 787. That made me more black and white. He told what step 1 was, and then he told me what step 787 was. But I didn't hear him say what steps 2 through 786 were. He didn't have time, like he didn't teach those in his presentation. And maybe he doesn't even know all those steps, but he just knows they exist. So there aren't really 787 steps. I realize this. There are not necessarily the 787 steps, like I said. Peter uses a different number each time he presents as an example. It's a relative number. Context is king. The key is there's a lot of steps. So the key takeaway from today's presentation is knowing and understanding that there are numerous steps to building a romantic relationship. I didn't have the support to learn steps 2 through step 786, and this made me even more black and white. Again, the gray area wasn't being taught. Nobody was even trying to teach the gray area. People were reinforcing me with my black and white thinking. And so as people reinforced my black and white thinking by telling me to just be myself, be who I was, I became more black and white.